Good evening. Welcome to the October 24th meeting of the City Council. I have the honor of standing in for Dave Tarter, who is coming from a work commitment. I'd like to call the meeting to order and ask you all to rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
I will. Ms. Conley?
Here.
Mr. Duncan?
Here.
Ms. Hardy?
Here.
Ms. Leon?
Here.
Ms. Shontiscott?
Here.
Mr. Snyder?
Here.
And Mayor Charter will be joining us shortly. Thank you.
Great, let's move on to adopt the meeting agenda. Do I have a motion, please?
Madam Mayor, move to adopt the meeting agenda.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Ayes have it. Moving on to proclamations. Looks like we've got three special ones tonight. First up is our proclamation declaring November as Native American Heritage Month. Mr. Snyder.
Good evening. Proclamation. Whereas the history and culture of our nation have been significantly influenced by American Indians and indigenous peoples, and whereas the contributions of American Indians and Alaska Natives have enhanced the freedom, prosperity, and greatness of America today, and whereas their customs and traditions are respected and celebrated as part of a rich legacy throughout the United States, and whereas we acknowledge that we are on the traditional land of the Piscataway, Manahoac, Dogue, and Nechachactank peoples, and whereas Native American Awareness Week began in 1976 and recognition was expanded by Congress and approved by President George Bush in August 1990, designating the entire month of November as National American Indian Heritage Month. Whereas as the city observes Veterans Day in November, it is important to recognize the contributions of Native Americans who served in the armed forces at 5 times the national average. And whereas this observance is also a time to acknowledge the many American Indians and Alaska Natives who are members of federal, state, local, and tribal law enforcement and who sacrifice their safety for the security of all.
Now therefore, I, Letty Hardy, Vice Mayor of the City of Falls Church, Virginia, do hereby proclaim the month of November 2022 as Native American Heritage Month in the City of Falls Church, and ask all residents observe this month with appropriate programs, ceremonies, and activities. Do we have someone here to help accept?
We don't have anybody this evening for the proclamation, but we will get it to the proper.
Terrific, thank you. Next up, we have proclamation declaring November as Live Local Month. Ms. Ann, please.
Good evening. All right. Whereas the City of Falls Church is proud to join with the Falls Church Chamber of Commerce to encourage residents to take the Live Local pledge and patronize local businesses in Falls Church. And whereas local businesses and the Falls Church Chamber of Commerce are challenging residents and businesses to pledge to keep 20% more of their spending in the City of Falls Church during the month of November 2022, and whereas living local creates prosperity because of the multiplier effect. When local people choose to buy products and services from local businesses, creating diverse job opportunities and strengthening the city's overall economy. And whereas shopping, eating, playing, creating, and doing business in the city adds to the local tax revenue base, which supports city schools, roads, and other services, city services. And whereas living local can be healthier for the environment because doing business locally often results in less traffic congestion and pollution. And whereas living local can be healthier for residents because it makes daily activities less stressful and encourages walking to local businesses. And whereas living local supports neighbors and local businesses while also building stronger relationships and a sense of community. And whereas living local helps to strengthen and preserve the fabric of Falls Church's unique business community while attracting new businesses to serve local residents and the community at large.
Now therefore, I, Letty Hardy, Vice Mayor of the City of Falls Church, Virginia, do hereby proclaim the month of November 2022 as Live Local Month in the City of Falls Church and urge all residents to take the Live Local pledge, attend some of the many Live Local events offered by local businesses during the month, and participate in the Live Local FC campaign by tagging local businesses and events on social media. And it looks like we have some guests from our Chamber of Commerce who would like to come up. Would you like to say a few words?
Thank you. I'm sure the mask doesn't help. But thank you, Caroline. Thank you, City Council, for supporting us on this. We do encourage the shopping and doing all local and supporting these businesses. I think all together we're supporting one another and creating a very strong community here in Falls Church. Thank you.
Thank you for your work in promoting our small businesses. Would you like to come up for a photo? And then our final proclamation of the night is to honor Veterans Day. Ms. Hiscott, please.
Thank you. Whereas on this Veterans Day, on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month in 2022, Americans will pause to recognize those who have sacrificed and those who will sacrifice in the future in the defense of America's freedom and democracy. And whereas we remember with somber and grateful hearts those who have served the United States of America with distinction and valor within our armed forces, and offer our sincere prayers for those who continue to defend the principles on which our nation was founded. And whereas in 1954, President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed the first Veterans Day proclamation calling on our nation to pay appropriate homage to the veterans of all its wars who have contributed so much to the preservation of this nation. And whereas the Commonwealth of Virginia is home to more than 780,000 veterans and tens of thousands of our nation's military families. And whereas it is fitting and proper to accord official recognition of our country's veterans and extend the appreciation of our citizens to those who wear the uniform of the United States Armed Forces and serve on the front lines preserving freedom and liberty. So we honor our veterans on this Veterans Day. And whereas the City of Falls Church will hold its annual Veterans Day ceremony at the Community Center on November 11th at 11 a.m.
Now therefore, I, Letty Harding, Vice Mayor of the City of Falls Church, do hereby honor Friday, November 11th, 2022 as Veterans Day in the City of Falls Church and ask all to honor our country's veterans. Do we have any? Looks like we do have a guest coming up. Would you like to say a few words?
Thank you. I'm here as a representative of the Falls Church DAR chapter and also as a retired Navy nurse veteran myself. And I thank you for all you do in the city for veterans. Thank you.
Thank you for your service, ma'am. Would you like to come up?
This year for Veterans Day, there are two celebrations in the city. The first is the annual 11 a.m. celebration by the Veterans Commons that will be the reading of the names that are on the Veterans plaque. And there are 4 more names being added to that plaque, and they are 4 alumni of George Mason High School who died in the Vietnam War. One of their names is on the plaque. The other 3 were not, because by the time they were in the war, they had moved away from Falls Church. Their official address wasn't there. But many of our alumni have done a lot of research into these men. So they'll be their family members and classmates will be there for this event. And then there will be another event at the high school at 1:30 with the same families. We will also be working with the VFW post that is on Shreve Road, and they'll be hosting those families for an event afterwards. So I hope many in the community are able to come and recognize this special event. We haven't done this in a long time.
Thank you, Ms. Connolly.
Madam Vice Mayor, if I might just add a note of appreciation, particularly in my family. My son is a U.S. Army vet, Army Aviation, including in the Middle East. And that's my son-in-law. My son's wife is a major in the Air Force, currently serving in Japan. So we think especially about all veterans, and especially those in our community and in our families. Thank you.
Well said, thank you. Moving on to the oaths of office. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone in the audience taking oaths of office tonight?
We don't, thank you.
Okay. Let's move on to the receipt of public comment. Madam Clerk, could you summarize the written comments we received, please?
Yes. Regarding bikes, the following asks council to ensure that an all ages and abilities bicycle facility be designed for Park Avenue before the project proceeds. Nick Anderson, Megan Bartholomew, Dave Bloomgarden, and Kevin O'Brien, who's the Trails Coalition Coordinator for the Washington Area Bicyclist Association, at 2599 Ontario Road, Northwest in Washington, D.C. Joseph Shirizi registered his preference for protected bike lanes as opposed to sharrows. Regarding the budget, Nick Benton, owner and editor of the Falls Church News Press, requested that the city move forward with purchasing weekly advertisements in the Falls Church News Press, citing the effectiveness of such communications and the benefit of spending public funds on them. Sean Dakin requested that excess budget funds be used to build pickleball courts. He also sent information about using street murals to calm traffic and about banning right turns on red. Deborah Z. Roth asks that the surplus budget funds be used to fund the first steps towards free Wi-Fi citywide. In other items, the Tinner Hill Heritage Foundation and the Social Justice Committee requested that council establish a race and equity commission. Nancy Schneider of 202 West Marshall Street wrote that no one would observe a 20-mile-per-hour speed limit and that the personal property tax on her 15-year-old car was too high. John Snyder said he was against using tax money to fund a theater. And those were our written comments this week.
Thank you. So moving on to receipt of public comment. Anyone, either virtually or in person, would like to give public comment?
We don't have anybody signed up virtually, but Joseph Shirizi is here tonight.
Terrific. Welcome. If you could state your name and address and limit your comments to 3 minutes, please. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, I'm Joseph Shirizi, Chair of the ESC. My comments this evening are personal and do not represent any organization. I just wanted to take a minute to thank Amy Crumpton and the rest of the organizers for our recent invasive plant removal event this past Saturday at Herman Stream Valley Park. There were over 30 volunteers, from children to elderly to local master gardeners to families, and really just a really amazing group of people at the park, all caring deeply about having native plants in our park, about having plants for pollinators, and a healthy park ecosystems across Falls Church. So I wanted to thank everyone who was a part of that, and thank the council for supporting those efforts. Secondly, I wanted to just reflect on a recent ESC meeting that we had this past Thursday. Our new ESC coordinator, Andy, gave a really fabulous presentation about where we are right now with our COG goals for 2030, for 2040, for 2050. And one of the things he said that really stood out to me was we have to cut our current emissions, our current greenhouse gas emissions, from where they are today by 37% at least to meet our 2030 goals. So we have about 7 years to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by more than a third. How can we possibly do that in the next 7 years? We have this bike lanes that we're going back and forth with, and what Park Street is going to be, but that construction is not going to start for several years. And we have to already be reducing emissions by that much. So we really need to get on it right now. The emission breakdown from COG is basically split between 3 sections: transportation, commercial, and residential. Transportation being the largest section. Half of all of the trips in cars, which makes up the vast majority of transportation emissions, are less than 2 miles. So if we cut out all of our less than 2 mile trips in cars, we would almost hit our goals immediately. So most trips are really short in the city, and we could cut out many of them. If able-bodied people, I think that it's if you have a disability or you're elderly, some people need to drive around and have short trips to be able to get to the grocery store, but many people do not. If we're going to hit any of these goals, we have to immediately remove parking minimums in the city, immediately put some of the money in the surplus towards bike lanes on Park Street now, not in 7 years, and immediately support things like mixed-use zoning in T-zone areas, mixed-use zoning and upzoning in single-family areas, and giving people the ability to meet their daily needs without cars. There's no other way to meet our goals. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone else?
No, that was it tonight. Thank you.
Terrific. Let's move on to council requests. Do we have any council requests? Quiet night. How about you? Well, I always have council requests, but I was going to let you all defer. Sure. Mrs. Scott.
I kind of feel like we should have the city manager's report before we do these comments, because I feel like I'm going to make comments, and I was like, well, I'm going to do that. I'm going to talk about that. Now, can we make that switch at some point in time?
It's a good idea.
So I don't ask you something you already would be addressing in 30 seconds?
Well, we could certainly give it a shot, and I could provide a city manager's report and then take council requests and directions after that.
Sounds good.
I would prefer that. I think it'd be more efficient.
Okay. I've got about five things to touch on rather rapid fire, just for community updates, but also city council updates. And I would like to start with the transitional zones and the work that the Planning Commission is doing right now to gather public input and ultimately provide a recommendation to the City Council. There's an ordinance that's pending to potentially amend our regulations for transitional zones, which are those zones between our more high-density commercial districts and our lower-density residential districts. The City Council referred this out to boards and commissions, and specifically to the Planning Commission, to develop the concept and provide recommendations back to the City Council. There are a couple of key dates coming up. The first is a listening session with the Planning Commission. That will occur on November 2nd. And all of these meeting times are at 7:30 p.m. with the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission will hold a work session on the draft ordinance on December 7th. And then on December 21st, the Planning Commission will hold a formal public hearing and then is scheduled to take a vote on its package of recommendations to the City Council. The City Council then would take this ordinance up and consider it in the first quarter of FY23. This is an item that's on the City Council's work plan, and Jack Trainer is our lead staff member for this item, and we look forward to engaging with the public on the concepts that are presented and getting the benefit of public input on the proposal. Second, also in the area of land use in the city council approved a purchase and sale agreement with Rushmark LLC, or their subsidiary for the development of the Virginia Tech site, which is called Converge. And Converge LLC is right now developing a final development plan that they intend to submit to Fairfax County later this calendar year. Pursuant to the purchase and sale agreement, Converge agreed to come to the city and present its plans so that we could have a chance to review them, really within the four corners of what was essentially agreed to with the purchase and sale agreement. The full review and ultimately land use considerations will be carried out by Fairfax County. But on November 7th, at the City Council's work session, we are planning to invite Converge LLC to give a presentation to the City Council. We would like to invite other boards and commissions to that meeting as well, and the public, just to see the plans. And then what our intention then would be, we have 15 business days after receiving the plans to provide any comments, but also to provide approval as the landowner for that final development plan submission to be submitted to Fairfax County. So that is that public review of the plans is currently scheduled for the work session of November 7th. Shifting now to COVID, the city has is using a portion of our ARPA dollars to do an after-action report on the city's response to the COVID pandemic. We do after-action reports for almost all events in the city of any emergency nature, and this obviously was a big one. So we did want to have a consultant to help us evaluate public comment on our city response to the COVID pandemic, but also work with the council and with city staff to kind of get all the information into this report. The purpose of an after-action review is always just to learn from what you did well and learn what you can do better in the event of a widespread emergency, perhaps maybe never again in our lifetimes like this one, but pandemics could occur again. And so we want to have that written document so that in the future our successors can learn the lessons we learned through the past 3 years. Shifting to an event that occurred in the city relating to children's safety. On October 14th, students near the Oak Street School reported a suspicious male that was inviting them to get into their vehicle. These young people had good awareness of that they should not follow this person's directions, and instead went straight to trusted adults and reported this, and the police immediately put out a notice to the public to be on the lookout for this suspicious behavior. The person was identified by the children as a white male, 25 to 30 years old, with a black beard, driving a beige or gray sports utility vehicle. We've not had subsequent reports of this individual since that October 14th event. In our public statement on this, we did point parents towards the Kid Smarts program, which is kind of the next evolution of the phrase stranger danger, and that training that we had for young people that we have had in the past. Kid Smart is kind of an evolved version of that to work with kids to give them good, sound, practical advice on how to avoid dangerous situations. And the city police also will be working with the schools, and we have an event planned on November 18th at the Oak Street School to continue that kind of discussion with students and with faculty. It is just another example, I think, of something that is, I think, unique in the region, or maybe in the country, is the close collaboration that our school administration and our public safety generally have, whether it's planning for emergencies or just working to make sure that our students are safe in our school system or throughout our community. So lastly, I want to offer congratulations. The city had 2 recent graduates from the Council of Governments Institute of Regional Excellence, and Joe Carter, our Emergency Operations Manager, and LaTanya Hall, our Deputy HR Director, are our 2 most recent graduates of the IRE program. It's a great program where city employees get exposure to all the best practices in government administration, but also build very strong and useful networks throughout the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments area. So congratulations to Joe and LaTanya. I'd be happy to take any questions or respond to further requests.
Great, thank you. Ms. Hiscott, do you still have requests and questions?
Yes, but that did answer a couple of them, so I think that was an effective use of time. Just saying. Why are you also planning, or how does one share the letter that we have on the dais? I want to make sure that this is acknowledged that the mayor and the council have written a letter to the school board chair in support of their joint statement on transgender rights. Is there a further publication of this, or I think it's very important that we are showing and that those who are listening and watching understand that the city council also supports the school's statements on supporting transgender rights and FCCPS in light of what's happened with the draft model policies put forward by the Virginia Department of Education. So I don't know if that's sufficient just to say that out loud, or if there's additional comments you want to make on that topic.
Well, I would just note that that the City Council did ask that there be a unified voice on this policy question. It is one that staff also supports and is implementing in our programs, and just to make sure that young people and all residents of the city have a safe and welcoming experience in our schools. What this letter is in basically in unity with the school board on its recent statement on transgender policies. but also in all city programs and policies as well. So that's the spirit of the letter, and did want to get just the council to look that over, provide any additional direction on that, and then we would get that out.
Any
Thank you.
comments for Mr. Shields on the letter while we're on that?
I'm in full support of this letter and in support of our schools protecting these students and residents in Falls Church City. So thank you for drafting this.
Sorry, yes, I think it's a great idea to draft it. There's a couple typos. So
Okay.
Put it right here. I'll put mine next to Caroline's, little things, but this is well done. Thank you for
Thank you.
responding to that request and making that happen. And I'd be happy to sign it. I know that's probably hard to get all 7 people to sign it. I think we're all going to be together Wednesday morning, so if it was done Wednesday morning, we could all personally sign it.
That sounds great. Suggestions. I know the state is actually taking public comment in response to the model policies. How would we feel about sending this on as public comment on behalf of the city council?
I'm in favor.
Great, so it carries a little more weight than just a letter that we're issuing. So let's make that happen. Thank you, Mr. Shields. Other requests for the city manager? Ms. Leon?
Mr. Shields, can you provide an update on NHP?
On what? I couldn't hear you, Caroline.
Sorry, NHP and confirming whether they've signed?
So we don't have a signature as of tonight. For the community's awareness, this is a home ownership program that the city is working in partnership with NHP, which is the owner and operator of the Winter Hill project in the city. And so we expect that will be signed very soon. I think the final agreement was being reviewed by legal, but I think we are about to launch. I'm hopeful that that's the case, and we'll have a lot of publicity for that.
I think that's important to just provide awareness that we've actually, like a kickoff would be great. But good to know that there's no concerns from NHP so far, right? Since last we talked. That's it for me.
Other council requests or comments? Ms. Connolly?
I have 2 questions based upon what you said, Mr. Shields. One is for the November 2nd T-Zone listening sessions. How are we doing community outreach? Are there emails? How are we letting people know this?
So the community outreach includes the following. It includes signs that are posted. We've put out 20 of the sort of the zoning notice or land use notice signs. So those are out scattered throughout the T-zone area. A letter will be provided to all property owners and adjacents in advance of the December 21st public hearing. Currently, the notice for the listening session is going out on all channels on social media, and it's on the headline of the city's homepage. And so we do ask people to spread the word if you can in your own social networks. Just oftentimes that's very effective as well when neighbors speak with neighbors. And then that web homepage can just be a great landing point for people to gather more information about it.
Great, thank you. And that listening session is live or virtual or both?
I believe that is a live session in this room.
Will it be broadcast? Can people watch it
So we're
too?
doing all of our meetings hybrid. So people can also participate virtually and watch it live or
Okay.
participate live.
Okay, thank you. And my second one is you mentioned the November 18th joint presentation with the police department and the schools on KidSmart, but that's a parent meeting. It's not for children or teachers. I mean, they could come, but I think it's
What-
aimed towards parents.
Okay. So, yeah, I'm not sort of the public announcer of that. I'm just
Yeah.
letting the council know that coordination is
Yeah, yeah.
happening between the city police and the school
Yes,
administration.
that was wonderful that is happening, but that is definitely geared towards adults. Thanks.
Mr. Duncan?
Even more on T-zones, all that's been said before. Planning Commission had a meeting last Wednesday where they took a deep dive into it, and a lot of good questions were raised and requests for information to staff, as the manager mentioned, the notice with the signs and the letters and so forth. are going out. There also was a map that was in the packet that I think we've seen, but I'm not sure how much the public has seen, of the various T-zone parcels around town, and there was an ask from one of the planning commissioners for just a listing of the property owners of those identified parcels. It's public information. It's something that an individual could go find on their own, but I thought that was a good question, and it would be helpful if that could be included in the public outreach, just so there's some understanding of the scope of the property owners who would be affected by a change in the T-zone. So I'd ask for that to be part of the discussion before the November 2nd meeting that you mentioned. Thanks.
Any other requests or comments? Mr. Snyder?
Just one quick one. Mr. City Manager, I noted that you're going to be bringing on a consultant to assist with the after-action report for the city. Do you want to offer cooperation with the schools in case they're interested in using the same consultant?
It's a good suggestion. Thank you. We'll follow up. And part of the scope of work really was on city general government operations.
Right.
The world of school response to COVID was a very complex response, and it deserves its own, I think, look. But I know there will be some coordination between the two.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, I've got a few requests, 2 kudos and 1 request. So wanted to also thank our police department for their very swift and visible presence at Oak Street. As a parent of an Oak Street kid, I think the following day we immediately saw officers out, keeping an eye out at dismissal and arrival, so that was much appreciated. And second, along the lines of what Mr. Shreezy said, I think everyone came out in force for community cleanup also on Saturday, so thank you to my colleagues and everyone who came out from the community to help pick up trash. Many hands make light work, so thank you for that. And then on T-zones, I did see all the yard signs. Those are very visible in the community, so thank you, Mr. Shields, for getting that out there based on our feedback. 2 requests. One is, as the liaison to urban forestry, they are not one of the boards and commissions that T-zones went out to as a part of the referral. And so if we could make a special attempt to reach our other boards and commissions for them to come to the listening session on November 2nd, that'll help make sure that we get a wider reach of other boards. And then second, something that I've mentioned before that I challenge us to think about is, besides obviously contacting adjacent neighbors and making sure that everyone impacted is well aware of the changes at T-zones, is for us to think about who's not at the table. So anytime we do public engagement, obviously people who are very aware and live there will come out to the meetings, especially if they come out to a meeting at 7:30 on a Monday night. Those are the people who have the flexibility in jobs. So let's think about more deliberately people who may not be able to come to those meetings, how we can make sure we get their input for big changes like this as well. Thank you. If there are no other comments or requests, let's move on to the business on the agenda. Madam Clerk, will you call the first item, please?
Yes, for second reading and public hearing, we first have TO 22-17, ordinance to amend Chapter 16, Finance, Article 3 of the Code of the City of Falls Church to include an electronic summons fee.
Great. Mr. Shields, who's handling this one?
I will handle this item, and I will just provide a very brief overview of this. The City Council gave first reading to this ordinance on October 14th, and it's now before the City Council and the public for a public hearing, second reading, and final vote. What is proposed is to add an e-summons fee on moving violations that are issued in the City of Falls Church. This is permitted by Virginia law in the amount of $5 per summons. The revenue generated from this fee is expected to be approximately $3,500 per year, and it will help the city defray a portion of the cost to administer a new system of issuing traffic citations by electronic device rather than by paper. It is hoped that as we make this transition, it will be easier for the customer or for the person who is receiving the citation. I shouldn't probably call them a customer, but it's the person who's on experiencing having to pay the citation. It will make it easier for them, but it also will make it easier both for Arlington County and the city staff to administer them as well. So that is the ordinance that is before the City Council.
Great. Do we have any comments on this one, Ms. Heath?
We do not.
Okay. Do I have a motion?
Move to adopt TO 22-17.
Second.
Madam Clerk, can you call the roll, please?
Should we be clear that we opened the public hearing and closed it? Is that good with you? Okay, thank you. Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Ms. Leon?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0. Thank you, council.
Would you call the second item, please?
Yes. Also, on second reading and public hearing is TR 22-17, resolution to grant a special exception site plan, section 48-488.B3, for a mixed-use building with a building height up to 15 stories on approximately .76 acres of land for the proposed senior housing building of the West Falls Economic Development Project, located at 7124 Leesburg Pike, portion of Real Property Code number 51-221-010, on application by TC Mid-Atlantic Development 5 Incorporated.
Terrific. Thank you. Who do we have from planning on this item? Or Mr. Shields?
Yeah, well, I will not be giving the full staff report, but I will introduce the item, and I'll also introduce Henry Chang, who is a new planner with the City of Falls Church, and he will provide the staff report tonight. I will just, by way of introduction for the public and for the City Council, this matter is before the City Council for final consideration and final vote tonight. This was referred out to boards and commissions on April 25th of this year, back in the springtime. And Mr. Chang will go through the details of the application with some changes that or responses to questions from the City Council at your work session last week. We will then be joined by the owner, TC Mid-Atlantic, and Mr. Brewer introduced the team there for a developer's presentation. One of the key features of this is the last land use action under consideration for the West Falls project. The entitlements were approved as part of the overall Phase 1 approvals for the full Phase 1 portion of the 10-acre site. And this is just the last component of the senior component, which is on a slightly delayed approval process. Before I turn it over to Mr. Chang, I will also note that the staff recommendation is adoption of the resolution 22-17 upon final consideration tonight. Since this is Mr. Chang's first meeting with the City Council, I'll just note for everyone's information that he comes to us from the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, where he worked for over 20 years, and he brings to us great experience. He's worked on some of the very dynamic and interesting projects that have occurred in Prince George's County. He has his master's degree in urban planning. He's a LEED accredited professional, and he's also certified in crime prevention through environmental design, skill sets that are very useful to the city. So, Mr. Chang, welcome, and thank you for your report tonight. And then after Mr. Chang, we'll turn it over to the developer for the developer's presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shield. Can you hear me right? Thank you very much, sir, for the introduction. Good evening, Madam Vice Mayor and the members of the City Council. For the record, my name is Henry Zhang, Principal Planner with the Department of Planning and Economic Development Service. Item 10A2 in front of you is the West Falls Church Economic Development Project, a special exception site plan, SESP, for senior housing, which is a 15-story mixed-use building consists of 22 memory care studio units, 55 assisted living units, 140 independent living units, and 7,700 square feet of ground floor retail. This SESP was discussed by the council in a work session last Monday, October 17. This 0.7 acre site is part of the larger Phase 1 development previously approved in an amended SEE and the SESP. The larger site is in the B2 Central Business Zone and is also in a special revitalization district for education and economic development that requires development projects going through a two-step approval, include SEE and SESP. At the time of SESP approval for the larger site in August 2021, the senior housing building design was not complete yet, and that's the reason why this SESP before you tonight. During council's work session on October 17, various questions were asked, and staff has compiled an issue table. Yeah, started on line 22. Basically, it's a table where we group all the questions/issues under 5 different themes, including urban design, community facility and uses, transportation and environmental sustainability, physical impact, and building programming, as shown on staff report page 2 to 5. As far as the entire staff report is concerned, most of the report remained the same as you all saw. Updated since the council's October 17 work session are highlighted in gray. I'm going to walk through the issues with the council. Let's start it with line 22. The first issue basically went away because the applicant requested the removal of the sleep sheet package. So let's go directly to the next issue, please. This is about EFIS. I believe the the table is arranged in the following style. Basically, on your left-hand side column are questions and the issues. On the right-hand columns are basically the responses, mainly from the applicant. In some location, the applicant responses followed by staff's information. The first one is about EFIS on the top of the building. Basically, applicant responded not to change at this time because it's very far away on top of the building. The other about transformer, which will be basically blue to gray after installation. The major issue here is about the D2 parking garage elevation. I think the applicant responded that this D2 parking garage was approved as a part of SESP and then will be implemented by the master developer. The D2 parking garage is not included in this SESP. Staff conformed the following facade materials with the master developer. Basically, the elevation facing Mustang Alley will be finished with brick. The elevation facing Haycock Road will be concrete and decorated with interim signage, advertising the large project until the phase 2 in the construction of the D3 condo building. Next, please. This is the request from the Forest Commission. Excuse me, I haven't finished yet. The south elevation of the parking garage will be also concrete. And then because it will be screening by the building A, so it will not be visible from the view from the public street. And the west elevation will be concrete as well. It's also screened by the senior building from the views of the commons. Next question on the urban design is from the Forest Commission. The applicant believes that the current precast and punched window design is already bird friendly. Okay, let's move to community facility and uses, please. The question asked about the minimum retail square footage. Yes, this project includes 7,700 square feet of retail spaces. And in accordance with the amended SEVC number 2, approved by the council on August 9, 2021, the entire project, phase 1, will have a minimum 117,600 gross square feet of retail uses. And there's no minimum retail requirements for each building. Instead, the retail requirement will be enforced site-wise. And then staff will review all the building plans for consistency and coordination with the SCE site-wise retail requirements. And currently, we have the number above this minimum required. Another question about whether the 2-unit increase will impact the proposed VC in terms of financial contribution. The answer is no. This is already being included in the original SEVCs. Now let's move to transportation and environmental sustainability. You will see a separate attachment, which listed as a attachment 1D is a separate TDM plan. Yes, the fare car is included. Next question is about the parking ratio compared to Kensington. I think the applicant responded that it's difficult to have a direct comparison. Right now, 125 parking spaces will be serving the senior housing project. There's additional 279 parking spaces will be shared in the adjacent D2 parking garage. Staff also provide some information here is that the current parking ratio is at 0.59 per dwelling unit. It's also within the previously approved range of 0.33 to 1.5 space per dwelling units with SEE, for the entire project. Next is about the bicycle parking. I think the applicant agreed to relocate some of the bicycle parking to the grade. Staff previously reviewed the bicycle parking and found that the proposed number to meet the city code requirement for both short-term and long-term bike parking. Next, please, physical impact. The request for physical impact information for this particular senior housing project, actually the staff calculate the physical impact of this SESP at the time of a larger phase 1 approval. Since the entirety of the programming is approved under that SEE, at this time of approval of the SEE, in August 2021, the projected annual net physical impact for phase 1 is more than 5 million. Next, please. Next is the question about whether this project will be operated under a tax exemption in future. I believe staff response is that any tax exemption application would be subject to city's approval. The applicant intended to build a for-profit facility, and then we can't guarantee this at this time. Next, let's move to building programming. As I stated at the very beginning, this senior project includes 22 memory care studio units, 55 assisted living units, and 140 independent living units with 125 parking spaces. And the amenities proposed are located on floors 1, 2, 3, 4, and 15. Next, please. Next is request for building design to reflect highest level of life safety, given the height of building and the uses of assisted living and memory care. The staff response is that the building will be reviewed for conformance with the most updated life and safety requirements of Virginia Uniform Building Code. Extensive review will be carried out at the time of building permit when the specific building design and details are available and complete. Next is about the building control access. Yes, the access will be controlled through a combination of key fobs, security camera, and the staff door entries. The last question is about brand operator. The city has approved rights for the operator, and the SRG is listed as a pre-approved senior living operator in a comprehensive amendment, number 3, schedule 3.3. This pre-approval come after review by the city and its consultant last spring. That's pretty much all the response to the questions/issues. In conclusion, staff recommends approval of the motion and the TR 22-17. This SESP is consistent with the previously approved SEE and is generally consistent with the city's comp plan, West End Small Areas Plan, and other applicable requirements of previously approved SEE, and the requirement of the zoning ordinance for approval of a SEE application. The applicant will have a presentation after this one. This concludes the staff presentation. I'm available to answer any questions. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Zhang, and my apologies. I had an unavoidable work delay, so I'm sorry that I arrived just a bit late. Let's now turn it over to the developer and his team. Welcome to you. Wow, we got dueling mics here. We got both of you guys up here. That's good.
So, yeah. Oh.
Yeah, I'm cool.
All right.
So I'm Bill Brewer with Trammell Crow Company. Thank you again for having us back. And thank you to city manager and the city staff. The last week, we've been working closely to respond to the comments from our work session and to revise our application. With us is Gary Steiner, who you may remember from last week. He is a principal with Perkins Eastman and leads their senior living practice. He's going to quickly take us through a slightly revised presentation that largely addresses the comments that were raised at the work session, but the main portions of that, the design, the layout of the building are unchanged. So with that, Gary, if you could take us through this.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for spending time with us this evening. Mr. Zhang, I believe are you driving?
No, we have somebody in the room
No,
here.
the staff. Yeah,
Okay.
I would just call out, if you want the slides advanced, just say next,
Okay.
and someone will hopefully do that.
Thank you. All right, perfect. We went through some preliminary slides at the beginning of the presentation last week, which talked about the history of approvals and actions on this site, and those are unchanged from last week. Next slide, please. And the statistics for the project are also unchanged from last week. As we talked about some of the things that had changed between the last time the council had seen the project back in April of 2022, we talked about the increase in unit count, the increase in the building height slightly, but not in stories, only in feet, and that we confirmed bicycle parking according to code, which Mr. Zhang also confirmed in his staff report. So really nothing different here either. Next slide, please. At the ground plane, this is the original site plan from the approved SEE, our site in pink. There are no changes to the ground plane of the project, so the site engineering remains unchanged. And the next couple slides just show in detail the streetscape and the landscaping around the site, which again, we intend on making no changes to at this point, and there are no changes from what we showed you last week. Next slide, please. What we did change graphically for your benefit is that we just put one floor plan on each page, so the images would be larger so that if there were any questions, the issues a little more clearly. This being the basement plan, it is primarily a service floor. Our utility entrances for all the different kinds of services to the building, as well as staff spaces for lounge and laundry and those kinds of things. So just a utilitarian floor below grade. And yes, the transformer vaults will be below grade and they'll be covered by panels that are removable so we can get access to the vaults. Next slide, please. Similar to last week, there are really no layout changes to the first floor. We have confirmed there are 7,700 square feet of retail. Those are shown in the aqua color on the right-hand side of the page. The purple color in the middle of the plan are the shared spaces that serve both the senior living use and the retail uses. So we have loading, we have a trash room, we have the emergency exit network, corridor network and exit stairs, and the fire command room. The gray in the top side of the page or the back of the building is our commercial kitchen that serves the senior living restaurant and provides food service to all the other floors in the building. And the restaurant itself is on the left-hand side of. And then in the front of the building, in the center, in the yellow, is our entry vestibule, which is adjacent to our living room, which is one of the welcoming spaces in the building. And again, other than confirming the retail square footage, there are no changes to this plan from last week. Next page, please. On the second floor, we have a variety of spaces. We have 8 independent living units. We have some amenity space for the residents, including a theater space, a multi-purpose room, a salon. We also have some administrative spaces in the gray color. And off on the upper right-hand side in the yellow, you can see the link or the bridge that goes over to the garage. And we talked about that being secured with cameras and fob access so that only residents can get in at that location. Next slide, please. This is a mezzanine level. We talked about this some last week when we showed it to the council, but there are 4 independent living units on this level that sits between the second floor and the third floor. And other than the elevators and the stairs and the service corridor, that's all that exists on this level. Next slide. The third floor is our memory care floor. It consists of 22 studio memory care units. It has its own amenity spaces, which are the purple spaces, and its own support spaces, which are the gray color. And it's patterned after many memory care units that have been designed by many firms, in that it provides a lot of wandering with purpose activities and the ability for residents to have a safe and secure environment, both indoors and outdoors, in order for them to stroll, or as we say, wander with purpose. The terrace is partially covered by an outdoor patio from the assisted living floor above. It also has 2 bioplanters to help with our stormwater management, and it has a secured railing across the front which faces Commons Boulevard to make sure that our residents are kept safe and secure and can't fall to grade. Next slide, please. This is the 4th floor. It is the primary amenity floor for assisted living, but it also has a number of assisted living residential units as well. Those are shown in the orange color, and there are a variety of studio and 1-bedroom apartments. But the assisted living floor here has a living room, its dining room, a library, a salon, activity space, and theater, and the ability for residents to socialize in the assisted living level of care. There's also an outdoor balcony, which we talked about, that faces out over Commons Boulevard. And above that, next slide, are 2 residential floors of assisted living. They also have a variety of 1-bedroom and studio apartments. So those 3 floors, floors 4, 5, and 6, you're looking at 5 and 6, they're identical, are the assisted living component for the community. Next slide, please. That one, yes, please, thank you. Independent living sits on floors 7 through 14. All the floors are identical. This is where all our residential units for independent living are, and they are a variety of 1 and 2-bedroom apartments, some with balconies, and that gives residents the ability to have some outdoor space of their own. Excuse me. And then we cap the building off, well, next slide please, with our amenity penthouse. So this is the 15th floor with a variety of amenity spaces for all the assisted living and indoor roof terraces, some vegetated roof and some bioplanters, all for the purpose of stormwater management. And then we have a roof plan on top of that, which is vegetated. Next slide, please. This is our main roof. The gray area is a screen mechanical yard. We talked about the screening before. In addition, we have vegetated roof on 2 sides to help with our stormwater management. And then we also have, in addition to the mechanical spaces that serve the senior living function, we have these mechanical spaces that serve the 7,700 square feet of retail, presumably a makeup and exhaust fan for the kitchen hoods should those spaces become restaurants. Thank you. Next slide. We talked about the imagery of the building. It has not changed since last week. It is architectural precast, which is a very solid and durable and handsome material, and also quick to erect. And there'll be 2 colors of gray material, a light gray, almost a whitish color, and a darker gray with ribbon windows and glass balcony railings. And next slide, you can see the other image from the other side of the building. This would be from across Mustang Alley and across Commons Boulevard. So again, 15 stories with a mechanical penthouse on top, excuse me, on top of that. And then our last slide, before we get to the tabulations, this is just a quick view, not fully rendered, of the Magnolia Street elevation, which shows the bridge from our building across to the D2 garage on the right, which is an open bridge, more in keeping with the bridge that goes from the D2 garage over to the residential building across Magnolia Street. Next slide. Our tabulations. This is just a little more detail on what we already talked about at the beginning, but we're talking about 7,700 square feet of retail, 217 residential units, bike parking down below, and more than 60% of our unit count, as required by the SEE, is independent living, here being actually 64.5%. So no changes really from last week. Next slide. I think there's some, so the Planning Commission recommendations, which are unchanged from last week, and then our voluntary concessions on the last slide. And I'm going quickly only because we really have not made any changes from what we spent time on last week. So in the essence of being respectful, we didn't want to read these verbatim. So that is what we have to talk about this evening.
All right, thank you very much. We appreciate it. We'll go ahead and open it up to questions and comments from council. Mr. Duncan, did you have something?
Excuse
Other
me.
than Cheetos in your mouth?
I know. I'm beating the mayor to the punch on getting the Cheetos out. First question I wanted to ask is a continuation of what we talked about a little bit last time, which is the affordable housing contribution. So I'm looking at line 600, and I'm just wondering if you can sort of walk us through how we arrived at the number of $228,412 a year, escalating at 3%. as the contribution that this project is making to affordable housing. It seems like a big number compared to any other amount of money that comes into the city for affordable housing. I mean, it's not Amazon big, but it's a fair amount of money, $250,000 a year. And yet, and if you could elaborate here, the per unit rent at the facility for, say, your standard independent living unit, that's the baseline I would compare it to, is going to be what? And take that what and divide it by 228,000 and express in some percentage terms what we're getting here in terms of affordable housing compared to what we get at some of the other projects where we've taken units instead of cash.
So when we came on board for this project, the affordable housing contribution had already been calculated by the city staff. Part of the reason why we came on board or were brought on board by Hoffman and Associates was because the previous developer was having trouble making the development work.
Mm-hmm.
So when we made a request for our additional density, that request was in part sized to allow for the payment of that $228,000. We had serious reservations about the methodology that underpinned that calculation, but in an effort to reach quickly a resolution on that, we simply said that is what the number is, specific number, and we will size, our request to the city to allow us to meet that obligation. That's in part what makes the request to back into the contribution on a per unit basis difficult to do, because we had thought about it on a per square foot basis, where we're thinking about revenue generated per foot, and the unit count, as you've seen over our presentations, has flexed, not a tremendous amount, but it has certainly flexed over time. But that process does make it a little difficult to kind of walk through the calculation you're referencing.
Mm-hmm.
But that is how we kind of came to that number. And that's part of why I think it hasn't been revisited, was there was a specific ask and then a specific solve on our part.
Interesting. Okay. Thanks for that background. Maybe others know this, and maybe I should have known it before now. Mr. Manager, what say you to the number that staff arrived at here? We're setting a precedent, obviously, as I mentioned the other night, that other developers will look to when they come to town with their projects, and that's fine, as long as we're comfortable that the number that we are establishing as our benchmark is, a reasonable number. Do you have anything on that as far as this number as it's evolved, as the project has evolved? Are we still comfortable with this number?
We are. The number was arrived at with the help of Boundary Stone consultants, with Ted Risher as the principal, and the desire for a cash amount as opposed to a number of units relates to that full spectrum of care, that someone might start their living experience in this building in the independent living and may then want to go to assisted living or might need to go to memory care. And this cash model allows portability so that someone could not be constrained by making that progression if they need to. It's the idea of a cash model also did have precedent with the Kensington, and it was a similar situation where the rent isn't really the driver; it's the cost of the services. And so, having a cash contribution, sort of a level of effort that the owner will provide on an annual basis, so that we can serve members of our community who can't afford, or who could afford at a certain AMI but can't afford the full market price. It allows them to have access to this facility.
Okay, yeah, I remember our discussion with the Kensington now that you bring it up. Okay, I just want the public to understand, how we got where we are. It seems, as I said, like a good number, a number that if it increases at 3% every year in perpetuity? That's not expressed here, but is that the expectation?
Yes.
Okay. That will amount to some real money someday. The only other question I had, with the square footage that you've mapped out, what's the FAR of this building?
So we're at 267,000 square feet related to retail and senior living uses, and then we hit like 290 when you consider some of the shared space and then the below grade, like utility rooms and things.
Mm-hmm. So the floor to area ratio as expressed is what, 4 or 5? I'm again trying to.
What would we be dividing?
We might need to, we could run the calculation, but I don't know off the top of my head what the land area is.
Oh, we're 0.75 acres, so
0.75.
what is it, it's like 30,000 feet. It's quite a high FAR ratio, and I think that's driven by our site size, because it's just a small parcel in the overall larger development. I think you would need to look at this as, the FAR on the entirety of the site. Just the way our transaction is structured with Hoffman, we'd be, like a 15 or something.
Mm-hmm.
So-
Okay. Again, I'm just trying to establish for the community, there's a lot of talk about density and gentle density, and this is intended and purposefully built to 15, 16 stories. So when I get in the elevator and push the button for the top floor, I'm going to get 15. Is that
Yes.
what we expect? And the top of the building, is that going to be open, used in any way, or is that just mechanicals?
So the top floor of the building is an amenity floor, so we have our pool, and then several multi-purpose spaces, a rooftop lounge, and then we also have rooftop decks. Want to take advantage of the height and the views. The very, very top of the building is open to the air, and that's where our mechanical equipment would be.
So the amenities, I'm sorry if I seem to be dwelling on this, but the amenity space, if I punch 15 on the elevator, am I going to go to the top residential floor, or am I going to punch 16 and get to the top amenity floor?
15 gets you to the amenities.
Okay, all right, fine. I'm just curious. I think there's been a lot of discussion about the need for density here as a way to monetize the value of the land, highly valuable land, in order to help support particularly the school system, the schools across the street. So the FAR number should and needs to be high for this particular location compared to anywhere else in the city. So I just wanted to get that out there right now. Okay, thanks.
Other questions, comments? Ms. Hardy?
While we're on affordable housing, Mr. Shields, could you refresh my memory? Because I thought we also did cash in lieu of units for the condo building. Is that right? It's outside the scope of the application tonight, but.
The condo building, their units actually were included in the apartment building.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Snyder?
Thank you. A couple questions. I noted in the opening slide we talk about tax revenue. So what do we mean when we say tax revenue? What's the number? If you go back to the opening slide, I think there's a list of issues we're going to be discussing. No, maybe it's the end slide then.
So I know that was a comment that we got coming out of our work session. So
Right, it says increased tax revenue. Tell me about the increased tax revenue.
we're improving, what's currently a vacant lot.
Right, but
so
what's the number for this?
I would need to go back and I can give you an estimate and share that with city staff. I don't know that off the top of my head.
Okay,
Sorry.
well, it was on the slide, so I thought I'd ask what the number is.
Yeah. So there's the net fiscal impact that was referenced, with the $5 million value in year one. And then, I think you had brought up whether this is a for-profit or tax exempt development. So we are developing as a for-profit development. So residents, we'd all expect to pay their taxes, and then we'd be paying our property taxes as well.
Okay, and the person, the owner of this is going to be SRG, or you're the owner?
So it'll be a joint venture, and we'll be bringing on a third-party capital provider. But yes, like Trammell Crow Company, SRG, and then some other source of capital will all be owners in the project.
Okay, and your intention is that this will all be taxable and you won't seek a tax exemption?
That is our intention.
Excuse me?
That is our intention.
Okay, great, thanks. I want to focus again on fire safety. That was a big concern of mine. I would note that our aerial ladder probably goes up to 9 or 10 stories. This is by far the tallest building in the city of Falls Church, so I want to make sure we do it right. So that 20 or 30 years from now, if something happens, we can feel that we asked the questions and tried to get the best answers. So, Mr. City Manager, you mentioned a process that we'll be going through for an intensive review of fire and personal safety. And tell me a little bit more about that. I also had asked that the fire marshal be present tonight. Is the fire marshal present?
No. And so, this building does have a very high level of review, both because of the types of uses that are in it and the elevation of it. And so what I can state very clearly is that this will go through that very rigorous review process, and your city staff have the training, they have the skill set to ensure that this building is built to the highest standards of safety for the occupants that are in it. And so you have our commitment on that.
So sometime during the permitting process, could we have a report back to City Council as to what are the life safety components? The big point I want to make is that we comply not just with current minimums, but we absolutely be at state-of-the-art. And in fact, look forward to additional requirements. Because again, this will be the tallest building we've built in the city of Falls Church. Now, obviously, there are very significantly taller buildings elsewhere, but this is under our control, and I want to make sure we do it right, all aspects. How many elevators does the building have?
We have 4.
4? Okay. Is that generally viewed as sufficient for this population?
Yes, we have an elevator consultant that we work with to size it, and that's something we work through on our 765 project, and we'll review that, again, as we're going through the detailed design process.
Okay, well, it looks like a lot of key issues from my perspective will be dealt with at that process. So again, I would ask for a report back to City Council at a critical point in that process before permits are issued, just to make sure that all of our questions are being fully answered in that process. May I have a commitment from the city manager for that?
So we'll be happy to come to the City Council and provide a report once the plans are in and the review has been done.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions from anyone?
Just one more.
Sure.
What's your construction schedule?
It'll be about 28 months, and then it probably takes us another 2 to open, so 30 months from when we start.
And when do we start?
We'll start 12 to 14 months from now.
All right, any other comments, Mr. Snyder?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. One more question. Environmental quality, what LEED level are you building this to, and can we push the envelope there as well?
So we are targeting LEED Gold. I think that's the voluntary concession on that, and I don't believe we have the ability to push any farther than that. From a practical standpoint, we were struggling to get to LEED Gold. So I don't think we can get to the next level.
Okay. So we are at LEED Gold, and that's a commitment.
Yes.
All right, anything else? Ms. Hardy?
Just a quick comment for Mr. Zhang. First of all, welcome to Falls Church. Good job on the staff report. I really appreciate the comprehensive review of all the comments that we made at work session. It is nice to be heard, so thank you for that detail.
Thank you, Madam Vice Mayor.
All right, anything else, or do we have a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt PR 22-17.
Second.
Ms. Hardy on the second. Any final comments? Any member of the public wish to speak to this matter? Seeing none, the matter is closed to the public. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Ms. Leon?
Yes.
Ms. Shantiska?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you, council.
Thank you. Congratulations. Next item, Madam Clerk?
Yes. We are going on to a first reading for TO 22-16, ordinance to increase the salaries for the City of Falls Church mayor and city council members.
Mr. Shields? Mr. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Tarter, members of council. What's before council is an ordinance that would increase the salaries for mayor and city council members effective on July 1st of 2024. Under this proposed ordinance, the salary for mayor would increase from the current $9,800 to $11,500, and the salary for city council members would increase from the current level of $9,200 to $11,000. The effective date of the proposed salary changes is the year after the next city council election. State law regulates permissible salary levels for certain local elected officials together with the procedures for amending salary levels, and this ordinance as proposed reflects these state law considerations. I would also note in the staff report there is a discussion of benefits for city council members. And under existing city administrative regulations, city council members would be eligible for health insurance benefits, long-term care benefits, and the city savings plan with a match of $25 per pay period. That's based on existing ARs. And so I noted that in the staff report, there currently are no city council members that have availed themselves of those benefits packages, but that information is provided for the public as that is something that is available to city council members. Because it has been discussed, I brought that information forward after consultation with both the city attorney and the city's HR department to provide that information for the council. I'd be happy to answer any questions that the council has on this item.
All right, thank you very much. Ms. Connolly?
Mr. Shields, are you saying that those benefits have been available all along, or they are newly going to be available this year?
So there's, when we looked into it, because the question really hadn't been asked in a way that caused us to look into it in detail, we did a review of the city's administrative regulations and we did a review of state law. So state law does not speak to the question of benefits. It does speak to the question of salary. And so the procedures that are laid out for changing the council's salaries are spelled out in state law. Benefits are not mentioned in that law. So the city's administrative regulations do have different classes of employees based on part-time, full-time, term employees, and the like. And under what I think is done in other jurisdictions in the capital region anyway, in Northern Virginia, our own administrative regulations would contemplate council members as being term employees and therefore eligible for certain benefits. The retirement benefit, for instance, is not something that term employees are eligible for. So accordingly, under existing policy, City Council would not be eligible for that benefit, but would be eligible for health care, just as sort of the notable one. And the other benefits are generally smaller in scale and in fiscal impact.
So this would change it so that city council members are eligible for retirement?
So, I'm sorry, I
that
didn't-
part is confusing to me. There's-
So I didn't probably answer the
sorry.
question as directly as I should have. This ordinance has nothing to do with benefits, okay? It's just about salary. Upon a review of existing policy, we came to the conclusion that, after all, city council members would naturally, if you chose to avail yourselves of benefits, under existing policy, council would be eligible for that.
So then line
So that's
40.
that's a separate,
Okay.
that has nothing to do with the ordinance, that's more of an administrative
So
issue.
this ordinance would go into effect, this is the first reading of this ordinance, then a second reading, and then it would go into effect in July of 2020, or in January of 2024, after
Well,
the next election.
it's
No,
actually-
not till July of 2024, after the next
That is
fiscal
correct.
year after the next election.
So July
Okay.
1, 2024, that's right.
Okay. So then line 48 says, council members are eligible for the following employment benefits: retirement savings, employer match $20 per pay period, life insurance. So you just said they're not eligible, but they actually
If
are?
I said not, that, I misspoke, they
Oh,
are.
you said
That-
for term employees, okay. Am I
I
hearing
think
this
you
right?
said pension, they're not
Not eligible for pension. And so these benefits that are listed here,
Ah.
health insurance.
So what's
the re-
retirement
I'm
savings if
sorry,
it's
so
not
the-
pension?
The retirement savings is a 401 equivalent plan.
Okay,
Where
okay.
the employer provides a $20 match per pay period. So that's different than the city pension.
Okay, so
Sorry
then
for the
one last
confusion on
question,
that.
just to clarify. While the salary would not take effect until July 2024, if any of us chooses right now to avail ourselves of the 4 or 5 listed things, we could do so by contacting HR.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions or comments? Yes.
Just briefly, Mr. Mayor, just one small clarification. The same law that allows or sets the salaries actually does provide the discretion to localities to provide benefits. So it says, in addition to salary, each member of the council of any city may be compensated with such benefits as are provided city employees by the city. And then it's left to the municipalities, in this case the city, through its administrative regulations to implement that. But there is some language in the state law that allows for that. So that's the backstop.
So, but this is something we've been home all along, right? So it's like, this has been available to all of us since the day we got elected. We're just now discovering about it.
Yeah, and so the first time I ever had a conversation with the HR department about this was about 2 weeks ago. And so I don't think I ever knew the answer to the question until the question was asked and then answered after a review of administrative regulations.
Okay. Mr. Snyder?
Thanks a lot, Mr. Mayor. I'll be voting against this ordinance tonight to make 2 key points. I think there needs to be a lot more transparency with the public and discussion, both on the salary issue and especially the benefits issue. I also think that the staff report is using an administrative mechanism to, in essence, legislate. In all my years here, that interpretation was never given, and now we're giving it. And I think the U.S. Supreme Court recently has talked in a similar environment where regulations are newly interpreted in a manner to achieve basically legislation. So for all these reasons, I'll be voting against this ordinance tonight. Lack of transparency and this administrative interpretation, which is being applied after literally decades of it not being something that was made available and never discussed with the public. Thank you.
Other comments? Ms. Hiscott?
Just to clarify again, this in front of us is only addressing the salary. It's not changing any administrative regulations. We're not voting on any administrative regulations. It would be a vote on using what is allowable by state law to increase salaries to those listed. Personally, I think that, speaking for myself, that availing ourselves to an increase in salary to encourage people to run for city council is quite important. This is happening in July 2024. It gives people a chance to think about what costs they'd incur by serving on city council, whether that's babysitting or elder care or any of the other expenses people incur to participate in city council, and then make a decision. I think we all, or many of us, recognize that we'd like to have representation from those who may not be able to afford to participate in city council unless they're given a salary that helps cover those costs, and potentially unless they are given an opportunity to have some of the other benefits. But I think those are two separate things. The first is the salary, and that's what this is discussion of tonight, in my understanding. If I'm not understanding that, please feel free to correct me.
Yes, Ms. or Mr. Duncan.
I just want to ask a question, City Attorney. So I understand the intervening election is required, but the effective date would not take effect till July 1st of the 2024 year is established in state law. Why is that? I mean, the state, the legislature, General Assembly has now mandated most, I think all localities have their elections in November. This seems like a throwback to the times when we had elections in May and council took office in July. Should we go to Richmond and ask them to, square up the new election date with the effective salary date?
I've learned over the years never to question the wisdom of our legislators in Richmond. I suspect, as with a number of things, when they change certain provisions of the code, they don't necessarily get around to contemporaneously changing everything that might need to be changed. So this may be something you want to look at. I suspect there are others that may be looking at this, but yeah, it's not discretionary. The language is spelled out exactly in the state code as to when these dates need to be.
Interesting. Okay, well, thank you. Yeah, Mr. Snyder, talking about never questioning the General Assembly. Just one comment. I mean, for precisely the purposes of transparency, I'm going to support this because if anybody's thinking right now that they might run for city council next November, a year from now, they would need to file by June. So, I mean, my whole point in bringing this forward, or supporting those who wanted to bring it forward, is to give people plenty of advance notice if the, enhanced salary is appealing to them, or if for some reason it's not an appeal to them and they're unhappy about it. This gives, the citizens ample time to be informed of what we're doing here. So that for that reason, I'm going to support this. Thanks.
Vice Mayor Hardy.
Thank you. I just want to second Debbie and Phil's comments. I think obviously voting on our own salaries is, of course, uneasy, but I think the intent is pretty clear in this case, where we want to make it easier for a wider range of candidates to take on this job. I think at the end of the day, the best city council is one that's most representative of our community. And I'll spare us all from the speech about healthcare being a right, so I'm glad that we've actually asked about benefits. Mr. Shields, sounds like this is the first time we've looked into it, so this is not a new interpretation or changing administrative regulations anyway. This is the first time we've looked into it and confirmed that state law indeed actually gives us that ability. So I think that is terrific. And again, for public transparency, for anyone considering running for office, know that that is an option, an additional benefit beyond the very small salary that is not even close to a living wage. So for tonight, for those reasons, I will support this tonight as well.
Ms. Connolly?
And I would agree with Ms. Hiscott, Mr. Duncan, and Ms. Hardy that this is a very transparent ordinance, and we started talking about this 2 years ago and missed the deadline. So I'm glad that we're able to do this now in plenty of time so that the community is aware, as well as Ms. Hardy said, those who are planning on running for office or considering it possibly a year from now. I think that's very important to be able to lay out there exactly what the monetary benefits are. There are many other benefits to being on city council that are not monetary but are personal, and just the ability to be part of city council is a great honor, but it is a burden on families and requires a large commitment of time that is far more valuable than the increase in the salary. So I do think it's important for future councils so that we can continue to recruit qualified and interested people to serve. So for that reason, I will vote for this.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Leon?
Yeah, thank you so much for putting this together, City Manager, and for all my colleagues and their comments. I think the only thing I want to echo here is support for this. You know, from a transparency perspective, we're discussing this here. We've discussed it in work session. And I do support that, you know, any effort that we in this office can support that increases access, you know, to democracy for more people to participate, you know, in institutions and give to the community. I think that is a great thing. And being able to offer benefits, you know, even though it hasn't been offered, I think I want to focus on the fact that we can start, not what we haven't done in the past. And with that, that's it for me.
Mr. Snyder?
I guess one other point, in my view, this should be a matter of public service, not another job.
Any other comments? Any member of the public wish to speak to this matter? Seeing none, the matter is closed to the public. Do we have a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I move to grant first reading to TO 22-16, schedule second reading and final consideration for November 14th, 2022, and advertise the same according to law.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Ms. Conley on the second, is that right? All right, were you one of them?
I was one of them.
Okay, Ms. Conley on the second. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley,
Yes.
Mr. Duncan,
Yes.
Ms. Hardy,
Yes.
Ms. Leon,
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott,
Yes.
Mr. Snyder,
No.
Mayor Tarter.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-1. Thank you, council.
Thank you. All right, let's move on to the consent agenda. Mr. Shields, is there anything you want to say? I mean, normally we've got the first part there. Are we going to be treating this, Madam Clerk, as two items then, essentially the appointments and then are you going to go through each of these, Mr. Shields, the 2, 3, 4, 5? Are we going to do that, or are we just going to?
Yeah, adopting the consent agenda, we'll adopt all of it together.
But normally you'd go through, or we've already done these, haven't we, in work session, right? That's right. Okay. All right, so let me just go see. Does anyone wish to pull any of the items off the consent agenda? All right, do we have a motion regarding the consent agenda?
Move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All right, Madam Clerk?
Ms. Conley,
Yes.
Mr. Duncan,
Yes.
Ms. Hardy,
Yes.
Ms. Leon,
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott,
Yes.
Mr. Snyder,
Yes.
and Mayor Tarter.
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. Thank you.
Thank you. Any business not in the agenda? Any standing regional liaison reports anyone would like to make? Mr. Duncan?
I would just like to observe that I enjoyed listening to the George Mason University Schar School program last Friday about transportation safety, in which our own Dave Snyder was one of the panelists. It was a good discussion about what we talk about a lot here, traffic safety, design of streets, what transit can do to help us, you know, reduce congestion and, I don't know, reduce frustration. It was interesting to hear the other panelists with you, Dave, who share the same difficulties that we do, even though, you know, the jurisdictions are much larger, particularly in regards to driver behavior and also the difficulty in getting small fixes done quickly. We're not the only jurisdiction that has trouble getting things accomplished that wouldn't seem to need to take as long as they do. It's just a matter of these things taking more engineering than maybe those of the rest of us who are not engineers understand. At any rate, it was a good discussion, and I appreciate Mr. Snyder representing the city in that forum.
Thank you. Any other comments, Ms. Vice Mayor Hardy?
Just a quick one. For the public to know that we are not holding Ask the Council session on Wednesday due to our interviews during that day for the city attorney. That's already been canceled, right, Ms. Heath?
Correct.
Thank you.
Other comments, Mr. Snyder?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I think there's a legislative committee meeting this Friday. Is that right? At 10 or 10:30?
10 o'clock this Friday in City Hall downstairs in the Laurel Conference Room.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Any additional?
I'm sorry, I forgot about the Economic Development Committee meeting meets in building for the first time in a long time, Thursday at 1 o'clock.
All right. Anything else anyone would like to say before we adjourn? Any final words? Any comments? Anything else that wasn't said that needed to be said? All right. What do you say we adjourn this meeting? Guys ready? What's that? Yeah, we do not meet next Monday. It's the 5th Monday. All right, and it's Halloween. So anyway, we are adjourned. Good evening.